Broken Vows, Second Chance. Chapter 1: The Unexpected Reunion. The autumn wind swept through the manicured lawns of the Blackwood Country Club, carrying the crisp scent of fallen maple leaves and the faint clink of crystal glasses from the terrace. Eleanor Voss adjusted the cream-colored cashmere shawl draped over her shoulders, her fingers brushing lightly against the silver locket around her neck, a piece of jewelry she had worn for 30 years, long abandoned in sentiment but never discarded. At 54, Elara, as her old friends once called her, carried the quiet grace of a woman who had endured more heartbreak than she ever let show. Her chestnut hair, streaked with fine threads of silver, was pulled back in a sleek low bun, her hazel eyes calm and guarded, shielded by decades of polite smiles and suppressed grief. She had agreed to attend the annual charity gala only for her daughter's sake. Clara, 27, vibrant and unburdened by the past, had begged her mother to step out of the quiet, isolated life she had built after her divorce. For 20 years, Eleanor had lived alone in her colonial-style house on the edge of town, tending to her garden, running a small local art gallery, and avoiding every social event that might stir up old memories. The Blackwood Country Club was the last place she wanted to be. It was here that her youth had bloomed, burned, and shattered all at once. "Mom, you look stunning," Clara said, slipping an arm through Eleanor's, her bright blue eyes crinkling with a warm smile. "Stop looking so tense. This is just a party. No one's going to bite." Eleanor forced a soft laugh, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I'm simply unused to crowds, my love. That's all." It was a lie. She was unused to him. To the ghost that had haunted every quiet night of her adult life. The string quartet in the corner shifted from a light waltz to a slow, haunting melody, and Eleanor's gaze drifted across the crowded terrace. Guests milled about in tailored evening gowns and sharp tuxedos, laughter and low conversation weaving through the cool autumn air. And then she saw him. Killian Blackwood. Time had not dulled his magnetism. At 56, he was still tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair now salted heavily with silver at the temples, only adding to his rugged, distinguished charm. The sharp angles of his jaw had softened slightly with age, but his eyes, deep, stormy grey, the eyes that had once stared at her with fierce love and unbridled passion, were as intense as they had been 30 years prior. He stood near the bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand, listening to a business associate speak, but his attention was nowhere near the conversation. His gaze was locked on hers. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute until her knuckles whitened. For 30 years, she had dreamed of this moment, feared it, avoided it with every fiber of her being. She had spent decades telling herself she was over him, that the pain had faded, that the girl who had loved Killian Blackwood had died long ago. But in that single second, every lie she had told herself crumbled to dust. 30 years. 30 years of silence, of separation, of building separate lives, of burying a love that had once been the entire center of her world. "Mom? What's wrong?" Clara asked, noticing her mother's rigid posture, the way her face had drained of color. Eleanor blinked, tearing her gaze away from Killian's face, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just a momentary dizziness. But before she could turn away, before she could hide behind the crowd and flee the terrace, Killian Blackwood moved. He excused himself from his associate, set down his bourbon glass with a sharp, decisive click, and walked toward her. His long strides covered the distance between them in seconds, each step sending a ripple of tension through Eleanor's entire body. The world around them faded. The music, the laughter, the chatter of the crowd, all of it dissolved into a distant hum. There was only him. Only the man who had loved her, left her, broken her beyond repair. He stopped directly in front of her, his grey eyes sweeping over her face, drinking her in as if he had spent 30 years starved for the sight of her. A faint, shaky breath escaped his lips, his usual confident, commanding demeanor fracturing for a split second, revealing the vulnerability he hid from the world. "Elara," he said, his voice low, rough, deeper than she remembered, threaded with 30 years of unspoken words and repressed longing. No one called her Elara anymore. No one but him. Eleanor's jaw tightened, her walls slamming back into place. She lifted her chin, her gaze cold and composed, masking the storm raging inside her chest. "Killian. It's been a long time." "Too long," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. He barely glanced at Clara, his entire focus fixed on the woman he had lost. "I didn't know you were back in town." "I never left," Eleanor said flatly. "I just stopped attending your family's galas." The words were sharp, laced with decades of resentment. Killian flinched almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightening. He deserved every cold word she gave him. He knew that better than anyone. Clara's eyes widened slightly, glancing between her mother and the stranger standing before them. She had heard fragments of the story growing up, vague mentions of a man from her mother's youth, a great love that ended badly, a secret her mother never fully shared. She had never known his name, never seen a photograph. But in this moment, she knew exactly who he was. "I'm Clara," she said gently, stepping forward to break the thick, tense silence, holding out her hand. "Eleanor's daughter." Killian's gaze flicked to Clara then, taking in her familiar hazel eyes, the shape of her jaw, the soft curve of her smile, all echoes of the woman standing beside her. A raw, unreadable emotion crossed his face, regret thick in his throat. He shook her hand firmly, his touch gentle despite his imposing presence. "Killian Blackwood," he said quietly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. You have your mother's eyes." Clara offered a polite smile, but she could feel the tension coiling between the two older adults, thick and unbreakable, a history so heavy it hung in the air like storm clouds. She squeezed her mother's arm softly, a silent offer to leave, but Eleanor gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. She would not run. Not anymore. "I heard you've been running the downtown art gallery," Killian said, turning his attention back to Eleanor, his tone softer, tentative, as if he was afraid to scare her away. "I've passed it many times. It's beautiful. Just like you." Eleanor scoffed quietly, a bitter, humorless sound. "Save your flattery, Killian. It always was your best weapon." His shoulders slumped slightly, the confident billionaire facade slipping further away. "I'm not here to charm you, Ilara. I'm here to apologize. Properly, this time." 30 years too late, she retorted, her voice steady but cold. "Apologies don't fix what you broke." Before Killian could respond, a soft, polished voice cut through their conversation. "Killian, darling, there you are." A woman stepped gracefully to his side, tall, elegant, with sleek blonde hair and perfect porcelain skin. Victoria Hale, 52, a renowned socialite, Killian's rumored partner of 5 years. She slipped her hand through the crook of his arm, her green eyes sweeping over Eleanor with a cool, knowing glance, a polite but icy smile curving her red lips. Eleanor's chest tightened sharply, a familiar old pain flaring to life. Of course he wasn't alone. Of course he had moved on. He had always been able to move on, while she had been trapped in the past, stuck loving a man who had abandoned her without a second thought. "I'm Victoria," the blonde woman said, extending a hand to Eleanor with practiced grace. "I don't believe we've met." "You're Eleanor Voss, aren't you? The famous local art curator." Eleanor shook her hand briefly, her touch cool and distant. "I am." "Killian has spoken of you occasionally," Victoria continued, her tone sweet but laced with subtle possessiveness. "He says you were quite close in your younger days." Close. The word was a cruel understatement. They had been everything to each other. Lovers, soulmates, fiancés, two people who had planned a lifetime together before it all burned to ash. Killian's jaw tightened visibly, his gaze flicking guiltily to Eleanor. "We were." Eleanor forced a neutral smile, masking the turmoil swirling inside her. "That was a lifetime ago. People change. Lives move on." The words were meant for Killian, a sharp reminder that he had no place in her life now, no right to intrude on the peace she had built. But as she said them, she knew they were lies. Some loves never moved on. Some scars never faded. Victoria smiled, seemingly satisfied, but her eyes held a flicker of suspicion. She knew exactly who Eleanor was. She knew the story, the old heartbreak, the ghost that had haunted Killian Blackwood for 30 years. She had spent years trying to erase Eleanor Voss from his life, and now the woman had walked back into it, uninvited and unavoidable. "Well, it's lovely to finally meet you," Victoria said smoothly. "We should catch up sometime. Perhaps you and your daughter could join us for dinner sometime soon." Eleanor's stomach churned at the thought of sitting across a dinner table from Killian and his new partner, pretending everything was fine, pretending her heart wasn't splitting open at the seams. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full. But thank you for the invitation." Before Victoria could press further, Eleanor turned to Clara, her tone gentle and final. "Darling, I'm feeling quite tired. Would you mind if we head home?" Clara nodded immediately, sensing her mother's urgent need to escape. "Of course not. Let's go." Eleanor turned back to Killian one last time, her eyes hard and unyielding. "Goodbye, Killian." "Elara, wait," he said quickly, stepping forward, his hand lifting as if to touch her, before he thought better of it, dropping it back to his side. "Please. Don't leave like this. I need to talk to you. Properly. Privately." "There's nothing left to say," Eleanor replied firmly. "There's everything left to say," he countered, his voice low and desperate, no longer the confident billionaire, just a man begging for a second chance. 30 years of words I never got to say. 30 years of mistakes I need to explain. Please. Give me 10 minutes. That's all I ask." Eleanor stared into his stormy grey eyes, and for a split second, she was 24 again, young and naive and hopelessly in love, ready to forgive him anything. The old longing flared hot and fierce in her chest, tempting her, weakening her resolve. But then she remembered the tears, the sleepless nights, the broken engagement, the way he had vanished from her life without a single explanation, leaving her shattered and alone. She turned away without another word, linking her arm through Clara's and walking toward the exit, her steps steady despite the way her hands trembled. She could feel Killian's gaze burning into her back, heavy and regretful, begging her to stay. As she stepped through the glass doors and into the cool autumn night, the music and laughter fading behind her, Eleanor Voss knew one thing for certain. The quiet, peaceful life she had built for herself was over. The past she had spent 30 years burying had finally come back to haunt her. And this time, there would be no running away. Chapter 2: Old Scars and Hidden Regrets. The drive home was silent. Clara kept her eyes on the road, but her gaze flicked repeatedly to her mother, who stared out the passenger window, her face shadowed and unreadable. The streetlights filtered through the glass, casting streaks of gold across Eleanor's quiet, tense features. "Mom," Clara said softly, after several long minutes of quiet. "Who was he?" "Really?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For years, she had avoided this conversation. She had never told Clara the full story of Killian Blackwood, too afraid of reliving the pain, too afraid of sounding weak for still caring after all these years. But after tonight, there was no more hiding. The past was out in the open now, unraveling around them, and she could no longer keep it locked away. "He was my fiancé," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the car engine. 30 years ago. Clara's eyes widened in shock, her hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "Your fiancé? You were engaged to him? Why have you never told me this?" "Because it hurt too much to talk about," Eleanor admitted, her throat tight with emotion. "We were young. So in love. We were supposed to get married, build a life together, have a family. Everything was planned. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't." "What happened?" Clara asked gently, her tone soft and compassionate, no judgment, only concern. Eleanor stared out the window at the passing dark trees, her mind drifting back to her 24-year-old self, bright-eyed and hopeful, convinced love could conquer anything. "His family hated me. The Blackwoods are old money, generations of wealth and status. I was a small-town girl, orphaned young, no family fortune, no prestigious connections. They thought I wasn't good enough for him. They thought I was after his money, his name, his status. She paused, swallowing the bitter taste of memory. Killian fought for me. For us. For 2 years, he argued with his parents, defied his family, turned down every arranged marriage they tried to force on him. He promised me we'd run away together if we had to. That nothing and no one would tear us apart. Clara's brow furrowed. But they did tear you apart. He tore us apart, Eleanor corrected, her voice sharp with old pain. 1 week before our wedding date, he came to my apartment. He told me it was over. He said he couldn't do it, couldn't leave his family, couldn't build a life with me. He gave me back my engagement ring, apologized, and walked out. I never heard from him again. No calls, no texts, no letters. No explanation. Just gone. Tears pricked at the corners of Eleanor's eyes, tears she had held back for 30 years. I waited for months. I hoped he'd come back, that it was a mistake, that he'd change his mind. But he never did. A year later, he took over the Blackwood empire, became the ruthless, untouchable billionaire everyone knows today. And I was left alone, broken, wondering what I'd done wrong to make him stop loving me so suddenly. Clara reached over, squeezing her mother's hand tightly. Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry. That's terrible. How did you ever get through that? I had no choice, Eleanor whispered. I picked myself up. I went back to school, built my career, focused on living my life. I married your father a few years later, hoping I could move on, hoping I could forget Killian. But that marriage failed too. I was never fully present. A part of me was always stuck in that year, stuck loving a man who left me behind. Silence fell over the car again, heavy and somber. Clara processed the story, her heart aching for her mother, for the young, hopeful girl who had been so cruelly abandoned. She had always known her mother carried quiet grief, always known there was a missing piece of her story, but she had never imagined it was something so devastating, so life-altering. Do you still love him? Clara asked finally, quietly. Eleanor froze at the question, her heart lurching in her chest. She had asked herself that same question 1,000 times over 30 years. She had tried to hate him, tried to forget him, tried to move on. But love didn't die that easily. Not a love that fierce, that all-consuming, that defining. I don't know, she answered honestly. I know I've never stopped hurting from him. I know I've never stopped wondering why he left. There's a part of me that will always care. But love? I don't think I know what that means anymore, not after what he did. They pulled into the driveway of Eleanor's quiet, cozy home, the porch light glowing warm against the dark night. After climbing out of the car, they walked up the stone path to the front door, the autumn wind rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard. Inside, the house was warm and familiar, filled with soft lamplight, the scent of old books and lavender, paintings lining the walls, all Eleanor's own work, pieces she had created to heal her broken heart. Mom, Clara said, turning to her before she headed up the stairs to her guest room, if he tries to contact you, what will you do? Eleanor paused, her hand resting on the staircase railing. She thought of Killian's desperate grey eyes, his quiet apology, the way he had looked at her tonight like she was the only person in the room. Like he had spent 30 years regretting what he'd done. I'll turn him away, she said firmly. I don't need his apologies. I don't need his closure. I've built a good life here, Clara. A peaceful life. I won't let him destroy it. But even as she said the words, Eleanor knew she was lying to herself. The moment their eyes had met at the gala, her peaceful life had already been shattered. The past was awake, and it was not going back to sleep easily. Meanwhile, back at the Blackwood Country Club, Killian stood on the empty terrace, staring at the spot where Eleanor had stood minutes earlier, his bourbon glass forgotten in his hand. The party was still in full swing behind him, guests laughing and celebrating, but he heard none of it. Saw none of it. Victoria stepped beside him, her voice soft but sharp with underlying irritation. You've been staring at that doorway for 10 minutes, Killian. He didn't turn to look at her, his gaze still fixed on the empty space. She's back. She's been here all along, and I never knew. You knew she never left the city, Victoria said coolly. You just avoided her. For 30 years. Killian finally turned to face her, his grey eyes dark and tormented. I didn't avoid her because I didn't care. I avoided her because I cared too much. Because every time I thought about what I did to her, I couldn't breathe. Victoria's expression softened slightly, reaching up to brush a hand against his chest. That was a long time ago, darling. You were young. You made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. You've built an incredible life since then. You don't need to dwell on the past. You don't understand, Killian muttered, pulling away from her touch, his chest tight with guilt and longing. I never got to explain myself to her. She thinks I left her because I didn't love her. She thinks I chose my family over her willingly. She has no idea the truth. Does it matter now? Victoria asked, her tone tightening with quiet insecurity. She's moved on. She has a daughter, a life of her own. You have me. We have a good thing together. Why ruin it all for an old flame? Killian's jaw clenched. He knew Victoria was right, logically. He was 56 years old, settled in his career, in his relationship. He had no business reopening old wounds, no business chasing a love he had lost decades ago. But his heart refused to listen to logic. It had been refusing for 30 years. I owe her the truth, he said quietly. She deserves to know why I left. And what happens when you tell her? Victoria challenged, her voice sharp now. What happens when she forgives you? When she wants you back? Where does that leave me, Killian? He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if forgiveness was even possible, didn't know if he deserved a second chance with the woman he had destroyed. All he knew was that after seeing Eleanor tonight, after looking into her haunted, beautiful eyes, he could not spend another day living with this regret. He had spent 30 years punishing himself for his mistake. Now he needed to make it right, no matter the cost. I'm sorry, Victoria, he said quietly, his tone final. But I have to do this. Victoria's face paled, her perfect composure cracking for the first time all night. You're going to choose her, aren't you? After all these years with me, you're still going to choose the ghost of your past. I'm not choosing anyone, Killian replied, tired and worn down. I'm choosing closure. For both of us. Without another word, he set his glass down on the terrace table and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the fading lamplight, her eyes shining with anger and fear and heartbreak. Killian Blackwood had spent 30 years building an empire, mastering every business deal, controlling every aspect of his life. But he had never been able to control his heart. And now, after 30 years, his heart was finally pulling him back to the only woman he had ever truly loved. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at her art gallery early, determined to lose herself in work, to push last night's reunion far from her mind. The gallery was bright and peaceful, floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with soft morning sunlight, original paintings lining the white walls, delicate sculptures displayed on polished wooden shelves. She had opened this gallery 20 years ago, after her divorce, as a way to rebuild herself. Art had always been her salvation, the only thing that could quiet the noise in her head, the only thing that could heal the cracks in her broken heart. She was unpacking a new shipment of local artist paintings when the bell above the front door chimed, signaling a customer's arrival. She didn't look up immediately, speaking over her shoulder as she adjusted a canvas on the wall. Good morning. Let me know if you need any help viewing the pieces or have questions about the artists. No response came. Only quiet footsteps crossing the wooden floor, slow and deliberate. Eleanor's shoulders tensed. She knew who it was before she turned around. She would know his presence anywhere, after a lifetime of memorizing every detail of him. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Killian Blackwood stood in the center of her gallery, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his silver-streaked hair neatly styled, his grey eyes fixed solely on her. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, gilding his features, softening his sharp edges, making him look younger, softer, more like the boy she had loved all those years ago. He had come for her. He had not let her walk away last night without a fight. "You shouldn't be here," Eleanor said immediately, her voice cold and defensive, stepping back slightly to put distance between them. Killian took a slow step forward, his hands raised gently in a surrendering gesture, as if calming a skittish animal. "I know I'm intruding. I know you don't want to see me. But I couldn't wait any longer. I need to talk to you, Ilara. Properly." "I have nothing to say to you," she retorted, turning back to the painting on the wall, pretending to adjust it, her hands shaking slightly. "Please leave. You're disrupting my work." "I'll wait all day if I have to," he said firmly, his tone unwavering. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out. 10 minutes. That's all I ask. After that, if you still want me gone, I'll go. And I'll never bother you again for the rest of your life. I promise." Eleanor froze. She knew he meant it. He was a man of his word, always had been. If she gave him 10 minutes and still rejected him, he would disappear from her life forever. A tiny, foolish part of her feared that. Feared losing the chance to finally know the truth, to finally close the chapter that had haunted her for 30 years. She turned to face him again, her hazel eyes sharp and guarded. 10 minutes. That's it. Say what you need to say quickly. Killian's shoulders relaxed slightly, a faint, relieved breath escaping him. He walked slowly to the empty seating area in the corner of the gallery, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated for a long moment before finally walking over, sitting stiffly on the edge of the velvet armchair, keeping as much distance as possible between them. The air between them was thick with unspoken history, 30 years of hurt, regret, longing, and wasted time hanging heavy in the quiet morning air. Killian leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his grey eyes locked intently on hers, sincere and unguarded. "First," he began, his voice quiet and earnest, "I need to say I'm so sorry. For everything. For leaving you. For hurting you. For letting you spend 30 years thinking I stopped loving you. There is no apology big enough to fix what I broke, but I need you to know I have regretted that decision every single day of my life." Eleanor's throat tightened, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Save your apologies, Killian. They don't change the fact that you left me alone days before our wedding. They don't change the years I spent broken and confused." "I know," he whispered, his face etched with raw pain. "And I will carry that guilt until the day I die. But you need to know the truth. I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I loved you too much to let you suffer." Eleanor frowned in confusion, her guard faltering slightly. "What are you talking about? What suffering?" Killian closed his eyes for a split second, gathering his courage, preparing to unpack the secret he had hidden for 30 years, the secret that had destroyed their young love and rewritten both their lives. "My father threatened you," he said quietly, the words heavy and broken. "A week before our wedding. He pulled me into his office and told me if I married you, he would ruin your life. He would destroy your reputation, sabotage every job opportunity you ever had, cut off every person who supported you. He said he would make sure you never had a peaceful, happy life in this city or any city." Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes widening in shock. "What?" "He hated you," Killian continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He hated that I loved you more than my family's legacy, more than the empire he had built. He told me you were a distraction, a weakness, that you would ruin my future. He gave me an ultimatum. Leave you, or destroy you." Tears finally spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, hot and sudden, as 30 years of misunderstanding began to unravel. "So you left me, to protect me." "I had no choice," Killian whispered, his own eyes glistening with suppressed tears. "I was 26 years old. My father controlled every part of my life, every resource, every connection. I had no power to stop him. I knew if I married you, he would spend the rest of his life making you miserable. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let the woman I love be destroyed because of me. He reached across the small space between them, his hand hovering just above hers, not daring to touch her, terrified of crossing a line. I let you hate me. I let you think I abandoned you selfishly. Because I knew if you hated me, you would move on. You would live a safe, happy life, free from my family's cruelty. I thought it was the only way to protect you. Eleanor sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, her mind reeling. For 30 years, she had believed he left her because she wasn't enough, because his love had faded, because he had chosen wealth and status over her. But the truth was far more complicated, far more tragic. He had sacrificed their love to save her. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered brokenly. Why didn't you explain? I would have stayed with you. We could have fought him together. I would have endured anything for you. I couldn't risk it, Killian said hoarsely. My father was ruthless. I was afraid if I told you the truth, you would refuse to leave me, you would fight him, and he would follow through on every threat. I couldn't let you get hurt. I couldn't lose you entirely. I thought letting you go was the lesser pain. He laughed bitterly, a sound full of self-loathing and regret. I was wrong. So wrong. The pain of losing you has been worse than anything my father could have done. Every single day for 30 years, I've wondered if I made the right choice. Every night, I've dreamed of you, of the life we could have had. Eleanor stared at him, her heart splitting open, raw and bleeding, a mix of anger, grief, sympathy, and overwhelming love crashing over her all at once. All those years of hatred, all those years of bitterness, all those years of wondering, they had all been for nothing. It had never been a lack of love. It had been too much love, twisted by fear and circumstance. My father died 5 years ago, Killian continued quietly. The second he was gone, I wanted to find you. I wanted to explain everything, to beg for your forgiveness. But I was terrified. Terrified you would never forgive me for letting you suffer alone for so long. Terrified you had already moved on, that you hated me too much to ever listen. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion, 30 years of hidden weight lifting from his chest. I've spent 5 years watching you from afar. Coming to this gallery when you weren't here, driving past your house, just catching glimpses of you living your life. I didn't dare approach you. I didn't deserve to. The 10 minutes were long gone, but neither of them noticed. Time had stopped entirely, trapped in the bubble of their long-buried truth. Eleanor wiped the tears from her cheeks with a shaky hand, her hazel eyes locked on his stormy grey ones. You let me hate you for 30 years, Killian. You let me believe I was unlovable, that my love wasn't enough. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I do, he said firmly, his voice broken. And I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me. Whatever you want. Whatever you need. I'll do anything. But even as hope flickered between them, even as the truth finally came to light, a sharp, cruel reality hung over them. Killian was with Victoria. He had built a new life, a new relationship. Even if Eleanor forgave him, even if the love was still there, they were not free to be together. Eleanor's expression hardened again, the soft vulnerability fading back into guarded strength. It's too late now. You have Victoria. You have your life. I have mine. We missed our chance. 30 years too late. I don't love Victoria, Killian said immediately, fiercely, no hesitation. I care for her, but I have never loved her. Not the way I love you. No one has ever compared to you, Ilara. No one ever will. His words hung in the air, bold and unapologetic, a confession 30 years in the making. Before Eleanor could respond, the gallery door chimed again. Victoria Hale stepped inside, her perfect blonde hair styled immaculately, her designer dress crisp and polished, her green eyes cold and furious as she locked eyes with the two of them sitting intimately together in the corner. The love, the truth, the regret, all of it froze in an instant, shattered by the woman who had unknowingly stood in the way of their second chance. Victoria's lips curled into a sharp, bitter smile. I thought I'd find you here, Killian. sneaking off to see your long-lost love. How touching. The drama, the heartbreak, the tangled secrets of 3 lifetimes, all collided in that quiet sunlit gallery, turning a 30-year-old tragedy into a brand new, devastating mess. Chapter 3: Tangled Truths and Jealous Fires. Silence crashed over the gallery like a tidal wave, thick and suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bright and warm, contrasting violently with the cold rage etched across Victoria's face. She stood just inside the doorway, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor, her gaze sweeping coldly over Killian and Eleanor, cataloguing their red-rimmed eyes, their tense postures, the unspoken intimacy hanging between them. Killian stood immediately, his jaw tightening with guilt and frustration. "Victoria! What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" she repeated, her voice sharp and icy, echoing through the quiet gallery. "What are you doing here? You left the gala last night without a word. You've ignored every call and text I sent you all morning. I tracked you down because I deserved an explanation. And now I find you here, alone with her, spilling your heart out to the woman you've never been able to forget." Eleanor stood slowly, wiping the last traces of tears from her cheeks, her composure sliding back into place. She refused to look weak in front of Victoria, refused to be the other woman, the villain in someone else's story. This was not her fault, not really, but the tangled mess of their past and present had left them all trapped. "Victoria, I think you should leave," Eleanor said calmly, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "This is my place of business. Whatever is happening between you and Killian is not my concern." "Not your concern?" Victoria laughed bitterly, stepping further into the gallery, her eyes blazing with jealous fire. "He's spent 30 years obsessed with you. He's spent 5 years with me, and never once has he looked at me the way he looks at you right now. Don't pretend this is nothing. Don't pretend you don't know exactly what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything," Eleanor retorted, her temper flaring slightly. "He came to me. I didn't seek him out. I had no intention of reopening old wounds." "But you're letting him," Victoria snapped, turning her fury toward Killian now. "You promised me the past was dead. You promised me she was just a youthful mistake. You lied to me, Killian. You've been lying to me for 5 years." Killian ran a hand roughly through his silver-streaked hair, his expression tortured. "I didn't lie to you. I tried to move on. I tried to let her go. But seeing her last night, hearing her voice, everything came rushing back. I can't pretend anymore. Can't pretend." Victoria's voice cracked, her perfect composure finally shattering, revealing the hurt and insecurity beneath her polished exterior. "What about me? What about our life together? We've built something real for 5 years. You can't just throw it all away for a ghost from your past." "I'm not throwing anything away lightly," Killian said firmly, his tone resolute. "But I owe Eleanor the truth. I owe her closure. I spent 30 years letting her suffer in silence. I can't keep doing that." "And what about my closure?" Victoria demanded, tears glistening in her green eyes. "What about the life I thought we were building? I thought we were going to get married, Killian. I thought we were going to grow old together. Was that all a lie too?" Killian fell silent, unable to answer. He had cared for Victoria, truly. He had enjoyed their peaceful, easy relationship, the stability she brought to his chaotic life. But he had never loved her? Not fully, not completely. His heart had always belonged to Eleanor, locked away in the past, waiting for a chance to resurface. Eleanor watched the confrontation unfold, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. She felt sympathy for Victoria, truly. She knew what it was like to love a man who could never fully love you back, to build a life on empty promises and false hope. But she also knew the depth of her own pain, the 30 years of suffering she had endured because of Killian's choice. "Victoria," Eleanor said softly, breaking the tense silence, "I have no intention of interfering in your relationship. I have no desire to disrupt your life. I spent 30 years moving on from Killian, and I had finally done it, truly. Until last night. She glanced at Killian, her hazel eyes sad and honest. I needed to hear the truth. I needed to know why the love of my life abandoned me. Now that I know, I can close this chapter. I can move forward again. You don't have to fear me. I won't take him from you. Killian's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. Elara, you don't mean that. I do, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. We're too old for second chances, Killian. We've lost too much time. Too much damage has been done. You have a life, a partner. I have my peace. Let's just leave it at that. Victoria's expression softened slightly, relief flickering across her face, but the jealousy and hurt still lingered sharp and raw. You mean that? You'll stay away from him. I will, Eleanor confirmed, her heart breaking with every word she spoke. I won't reopen this wound again. For any of us. With that, she turned away from both of them, walking back toward the back of the gallery, her shoulders straight despite the way her heart crumbled inside. Please both of you leave. I have work to do. Victoria nodded, her gaze sharp and triumphant as she turned to Killian. Come on, Killian. We're leaving. But Killian didn't move. He stood frozen in place, his eyes locked on Eleanor's retreating figure, devastated by her choice to walk away again, to deny the second chance they had both spent 30 years craving. Killian, Victoria said sharply, grabbing his arm. Now. He finally tore his gaze away from Eleanor, his face hard and defeated. With one last, lingering look at the woman he loved, he allowed Victoria to pull him toward the door. The bell chimed loudly as they left, the sound echoing through the empty gallery, final and devastating. As soon as the door closed behind them, Eleanor's facade crumbled completely. She leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor, silent tears pouring down her face, her hands trembling violently. The truth had set her free, but it had also broken her all over again. After 30 years of hatred and grief, she finally knew the truth, that Killian had loved her, had sacrificed for her, had never forgotten her. But knowing the truth didn't give her back the life they could have had. It didn't give her back her lost youth, her broken dreams, the decades they had wasted apart. And worst of all, it didn't erase the fact that he was still with someone else. That even after all the secrets were uncovered, they were still impossible. Outside the gallery, Victoria and Killian stood on the sidewalk, the tension between them thick and unbreakable. Victoria released his arm, stepping back from him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You still love her, she said quietly, no longer angry, just defeated. You never stopped loving her. Killian didn't lie. There was no point in lying anymore. I never stopped. Victoria closed her eyes, a shaky breath escaping her. I knew it. I always knew it. I spent 5 years trying to compete with a memory, a ghost from your past. I thought if I loved you enough, if I was good enough, you'd forget her. But you never did. Victoria, I'm so sorry, Killian said, his voice full of genuine remorse. I never meant to hurt you. I cared for you deeply. I just never could love you the way you deserved. She opened her eyes, staring up at him with raw, broken honesty. Then why did you stay with me for 5 years? Why let me fall in love with you if your heart was always hers? Because I thought she was lost to me forever, he admitted quietly. I thought I'd never get to explain myself to her, never get closure. I thought I had no right to chase her after 30 years. I thought settling was the only option I had. Settling? Victoria repeated, her voice cracking. I was your settlement? Your consolation prize? No, Killian rushed to correct, his tone urgent. You were kind, and steady, and good to me. You gave me peace when I had none. But peace isn't love, Victoria. Not the kind of love that lasts a lifetime. Victoria nodded slowly, accepting the truth, the final crushing blow to her 5 years of hope. I see. Then we're done, Killian. I can't stay with someone who's always in love with another woman. I deserve someone who loves me fully, Completely, with no ghosts, no regrets, no past holding them back. Killian's shoulders slumped, guilt washing over him. I know you do. I'm so sorry I wasted your time. Don't apologize, Victoria said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. Just go. Go chase the love you've spent 30 years regretting. I hope it's worth it. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps firm, refusing to look back at the man who had broken her heart. She had loved him deeply, faithfully, for 5 years, but she would not beg for a love that was never truly hers. Killian stood alone on the sidewalk, staring after her retreating figure, a heavy weight of guilt and sorrow settling over him. He had hurt a good woman, a woman who had loved him truly and selflessly, all because his heart had never let go of the past. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out. His relationship was over. The only thing left was to fight for the woman he had spent 30 years losing. He turned back toward the gallery doors, his resolve hardening. Eleanor had said they were too late, that they had no second chance. But Killian Blackwood had spent 30 years accepting loss. He would not accept it any longer. He would fight for her. Fight for their second chance. Fight for the life they had both been robbed of. The rest of the day passed slowly for Eleanor, each minute dragging by as she tried and failed to focus on her work. Every brushstroke, every conversation with customers, every quiet moment was consumed by thoughts of Killian, of the truth he had told her, of the decades of pain that had been unnecessary, all along. Clara stopped by the gallery in the afternoon, noticing her mother's red, puffy eyes, her distracted demeanor immediately. She pulled Eleanor into the back office, closing the door gently, her expression full of concern. Mom, what happened? You look devastated. Eleanor sank into the office chair, finally letting her guard fall completely, spilling the entire story to her daughter, the truth about Killian's father's threats, the sacrifice he had made, the 30 years of mutual regret and misunderstanding. Clara listened in stunned silence, her eyes widening with every word, her heart aching for her mother and for the young couple who had lost everything to cruelty and circumstance. So he didn't leave you because he didn't love you, Clara whispered when Eleanor finished. He left you to protect you. Eleanor nodded, fresh tears welling in her eyes. Yes. All those years I hated him, all those years I blamed him, he was suffering too. He was carrying this secret alone, blaming himself every single day. But Mom, what about Victoria? Clara asked gently. What happens now? Nothing happens, Eleanor said firmly, though her voice wavered. I told him we're too late. We've lost too much time.